Thanks everyone so much for coming tonight. I hope that we can give you some helpful information on the future of podcasting, the past of podcasting, how to get into the industry. We've been doing it for a while. I mean, probably like decades combined on this panel. So hopefully we can be helpful, and we really look forward to your questions. And I'm going to start by asking this amazing panel some of my own questions. So I think because this is called Podcasting What's Next, Jenny, I'm going to start with you and ask, how has the podcast industry changed over the past few years, and how do you think it will change over the next few years? It's a big question, I know, but give us what you got.
Just an easy one to start. I think I can sort of answer that question by way of thinking about like my experience at Wondery in the last few years. You know, when I started, we were, I think, about 25-ish people. We've at least doubled in size since I've been there over the last few years. And obviously, like everyone knows, we just got acquired by Amazon. So, you know, there's been a lot of consolidation in the podcasting industry since I've joined. And I think that's going to continue. I think larger and larger players are getting into the space, clearly. You know, Amazon is excited about what we do, and they're excited about expanding and ramping that up and continuing to grow. So I do think it's changed a little bit, in that I know sometimes there's concern with smaller, more independent podcasters. I think where I see the plus side on that is that companies like ours are also sometimes looking to bring those kinds of shows into their networks and to help like give more opportunities. So there I see like people who maybe have just been doing podcasting as a labor of love. There's actually now an opportunity to professionalize that and actually like have people make a living at that, which I think is exciting because people are making great content, and to be able to actually get paid for that is always nice. So that's a tough question to answer, but I think I see these trends continuing. I see, you know, more international growth. I see podcasting has already gone mainstream. I used to have to explain to people what a podcast was. My parents listen to podcasts now, so that sort of over the hurdle of that. And I think we're just going to see more and more of that in the coming years.
Well, yeah, it took my parents like 10 years to figure out how to use the podcast app, but they're finally there. So I'm psyched about that. Let's move to Zakiya. I want to talk about kind of your path in the industry. How did you get started, and what are you doing now?
Yeah, I feel like I had a pretty traditional path, though I didn't study journalism or any kind of storytelling. I studied anthropology and psychology and gender and sexuality. So I thought I was going to go into academia, but then I was like, this is a little boring. And you know, there's not, it's just, it felt so gray, and I wanted a job with more color and excitement. So I discovered podcasts. And so I got my first internship at StoryCorps, which was great because I had hands-on experience cutting tape, which is a very vital skill if you want to be a producer. And then from there, I landed a job as an associate producer at Latino USA. And then I started freelancing after that, and just feeling like I'm jumping from lily pad to lily pad to lily pad, getting different jobs and picking up a lot of different experiences. And not one job is the same as the next. So it's exciting.
I didn't know you started as a StoryCorps intern. I did too, fun fact.
A lot of people have roots at StoryCorps.
It's true. Just going off of that for you also, what is a thing that you wish you had known when you were starting out?
I wrote down a whole list because I know you gave me a heads up you were going to ask me this. I just was writing down bullet points, and it's taken up a full page. So I'm going to try to be quick.
Take your time. It's helpful advice.
Okay. What I had wished I had known, your colleagues are not your family. I feel like as like a young producer, especially like a young, eager producer, you want to prove your worth. You're so excited to even be in the room that you're willing to just do anything. And I learned that that leads to exploitation and tokenism and unfair work environments and overworking yourself and being undervalued. And especially, you know, being like a young Black woman in these rooms, often the only one, I was just like, I just have to do whatever it takes to stay in this room and prove my worth. And I wish, and I had a job where people were like, oh, we're a family. And that kind of idea was used to manipulate us into being like, oh, well, then we should give our blood, sweat, and tears 24/7. And I learned that having a healthy work-life balance is vital to just human existence. Like at least for me, I was not put on this earth to work. And I learned that it's okay. You can still be passionate about what you do, but also set boundaries. So I wish I had known that earlier. I wish I had known my worth earlier and stood by it. Never accept unpaid labor. Always ask for a check. And if they can't pay you, then they shouldn't even be trying to hire for that role. Another thing, I'm just looking at my list. And another thing I learned is that oftentimes you might think like, oh, I need to be a certain way or act a certain way, and then they'll like me, then I'll fit in. But in fact, I feel like, especially in our storytelling field, people, to be a good producer, I feel like you shouldn't be boring. I don't know, you should have your own thoughts and be unique and look at the world in a different way and be able to bring that to your work. And that's what people want on their team. They don't want just another person who grew up listening to NPR, studied journalism at Brown, and then did this, you know, which is fine. Everyone has their own path, but don't be ashamed or embarrassed or quiet about what makes you different. In fact, the more different you are and the more you can own it and show that it's an asset, like the more people are going to want to work with you. And also, I'll just make this one the last one. I learned not to idolize people and institutions to the point where I'm blinded from like misconduct or unfair working institutions. Like, for example, I don't know how many all out there, you know, are following along with like, you know, the podcast dramas and reckonings, racial reckonings, sexual harassment reckonings, but you know, there's a lot going down in New York Times. New York Times, of course, is like the Harvard of journalistic institutions. And when I was first starting out, I was like, oh, it'd be so cool to work at New York Times, because I was just so focused on having the shiniest resume as opposed to thinking about, but what is a good place for me? Where can I learn? So it's less about the people and the places and like the names and who's popular and working at popular places, but it's more so about what tangible experience can I get and then use that to level up. So that's my long answer.
Those were all wonderful. Thank you. Does anyone else on the call, or I guess it's not a call, it's a something else. I do these all day as calls. Does Justine or Anabel or Jenny, does anyone else have an answer to that question of just like, what do you wish you'd known? You don't have to. I have one actually. One thing that I always think about is like, I think when you're first getting into podcasting or really any kind of industry, you're looking all the time to network with people. You're like, I have to, you know, meet people and network. And I was like, I don't totally know what that means, but I know it's this thing I have to do. And the thing that I realized was that so many of the people who were like my direct colleagues starting out in podcasting ended up being like important people in the industry. And so just having your sort of direct colleagues and friends as your network is, I think, really, like, I'm still, you know, always like talking. I mean, I get to give people jobs now, and like often it will be like someone I've, you know, like known for years and we came up together, and or like I recently hired someone who had like spoken to a class I was in as like he was the expert and now he's my employee. So I think like your network is often different than what you think it's going to be. And like networking doesn't have to mean like kissing of people that you think are powerful. I think it's more about fostering relationships with people who, you know, are going into the industry like you are and who you can work with.
I'll actually just add one thing, which is that I think, especially in podcasting, we're such a relatively new field that it's really, there's not a lot of standardization between job titles. And this is a very specific thing, but if a producer at one place doesn't mean the same thing as a producer at another place. And on the note of networking, that's actually a really great question to be asking people as you're trying to get to know new people is, what is your actual job? How do you spend your days? Like, what makes this job that you have different than this job that you had at this other place? And I think that can really help you figure out what kind of producer or host or editor you want to be, and not just assume that it's always the same job at any place that you would be looking.
Now I'm going to ask you to continue, Anabel. I have a couple questions for you, but now that you've brought it up, what is your job? What do you do every day?
Yeah, so I work at WNYC, which is the public radio station in New York City, and I'm a producer there at one of our podcasts, Death, Sex, and Money. And I also sort of help out on other shows as needed. But I have a special focus on working on new special projects, sort of larger episodes that take a little more lead time. So we are, in theory, you know, we're a weekly show, but we have these longer projects that I tend to take a little bit more of a lead role on. And that can often involve working with new hosts, working with outside contributors, working with many, many, many different interviewees. So those, we think of them as more sort of projects that are in development as opposed to the weekly Death, Sex, and Money episodes. And yeah, my days can look like anything depending on which of the 365 it is. So it could be a mix of researching ideas for the show, pitching guests to the team, to our host, and saying, I think this person would be really good because they can talk about X, Y, and Z. Once we get a green light on that guest, I prep those interviews. I tell the host, here's what I think we should talk to them about. Here's what would make a really good episode. And then from there, after we've recorded it, there's a lot of time that is spent editing the tape, sitting in on sessions with my editors and hearing notes, applying notes, and refining and refining and refining until it comes out. And then on the back end for us, there's tons of work involved in getting the episode promoted, doing social media posts, writing newsletters, pitching it to different media publications for coverage, really hoping to, you know, get as many people to hear it as possible. So it's really all encompassing. We're a very small team and we try to do a lot. So that means every single person ends up doing everything that needs to happen on an episode.
Cool. And a big question, but what do you think makes a podcast successful?
Yeah, it is big. And I think I really like this question because I think there's a lot of different ways to think about it and none of them are wrong. So I think that the first two things that come to mind immediately are, what are my download numbers? How many people are hearing the thing that I make? And that's the sort of thing that affects where you are on iTunes charts. It sort of gets you that buzz of like, this is the big new show. And hand in hand with that, something that's also really important is how much money can I bring in with this? Can I monetize it? Can I sell ads? Can I, for us as a public radio station, will members support us? Will they donate money so that we can keep doing the work that we want to do? And both of those things are super, super important. Obviously, you have to have those in order to make a show that people hear. But the two things that I also really like to think about are impact, which is if you're doing journalism, storytelling, you want the things that you're doing to land and make an impact in some way. So you can also say, my show is successful because I reported a story about this thing and it led to change in the real world. To me, that's a huge metric of success. And then something also that we think about a lot at Death, Sex, and Money is listener engagement. And that's kind of a fancy way of saying, like, do people feel really tightly connected to our show? When we ask them a question, do they send us emails and respond? Do they share it with the episodes with their friends? Do they, tell people about us? And that's something that's really hard to measure, but we have found that that's one of the sort of greatest measures of success for us is, do we have an audience that feels deeply connected to this show and will be with us for the long haul?
Totally. I know sometimes you look at the download numbers and they look good or fine. And then you just like get an email from a listener and it just means so much more than download numbers ever could. So I want to move on to Justine. First of all, can you tell us a little bit? I mean, I have a million questions related to my favorite show, which wrapped up last night, The Bachelor, that I won't ask you here, but might hit you up another time. Will you tell us a little bit about your podcast?
Sure. So I am the co-host of Two Black Girls, One Rose. We are a completely independent run podcast, and we cover all things Bachelor, but we also do a bunch of other shows as well. In 2 weeks, we're about to start Married at First Sight. We did Insecure. We do, what else we do? We did Love is Blind. So we really go all year round. I know the Bachelor machine goes all year round as well, but we keep going all year. So we're always pumping out content. And yeah, it's the two of us, and then our editor Jody just joined last August. So
amazing. So, and it's a weekly show generally?
Weekly show. Yep, every Wednesday.
Amazing. That's hard to do. So just, I mean, I know how hard that is. Can you talk to people about kind of what that production process looks like?
Yeah, sure. So my co-host and I both have 9-to-5 jobs as well. And so we have to design a schedule that like really works for us at this point. And so basically, if I was going to start a podcast and I took The Bachelor out of it, I would say that you start with your topic. You lead into a structure, because I think having some sort of a structure and markers during the time of the podcast is really important, so that people can kind of get familiar with you and kind of know what to expect, even when they listen. And then you have to think about your added value in whatever space you're in. For us, it wasn't so much like, I hadn't watched The Bachelor before we started the podcast. I just watched one season. And my co-host watched every season since, I think, 2002, since as long as it's been around. But what we added value is friendship and Black female voices in the space. And so that was our added value going in. And then we hooked up some little microphones we got from Amazon that were $37. We started recording. We learned how to edit in GarageBand, and we just put it out into the world. And we did that every week. We've done that every week for 3 years now. So that's the basics of like producing the actual content. And now we have an editor, so we like send it to her, and she does a great job with that.
That's great. And who's your audience, and how do you keep listeners not just engaged, but also like really kind of connected to the show and excited about it?
Yeah, I think a lot. Wait, so which show? Connected to our show or connected to The Bachelor?
Oh, sorry, your podcast.
Okay. We keep people connected to the show. I think the main reason is probably our friendship. Our number one motto has always been, we have to keep this fun. And if it's not fun anymore, then we have to figure out another plan of action. So what you're really hearing is like two girls on the couch talking about their favorite reality, reality kind of show, and like dishing about it. But we also have sort of like a language that we've set up around it. So we have Becky of the Week, invite to the cookout. We have all different kind of phrases and things that people feel like they really know us. So people do feel like they're watching us on the couch talking, and now people feel like they're friends with us. And we have a really beautiful community of people who interact with each other on their own and kind of run their own show on the side, which has been really, really great to see. And also we've been pretty vulnerable with them too, especially over this last season, where it got a little rough there at the end.
Extremely rough at the end. And the podcast it's an independent podcast. It's not part of a network, right? Yeah. Nope. So I'm continuing I feel like I'm shooting a lot of questions at you right now, but But I feel like a question that I get more than any other question, there are two actually from independent podcasters. One is how do I monetize, and the second is how do I market? So basically, yeah, like how do I make any money off of this thing, and how do I get people to listen? Because there are over 1 million, I think there are over 1 million podcasts in the world now. I think there are over 1 million just on Apple. Probably more that haven't, made it there. But it's really hard to get any attention for yours. So what have you done, as much as you're comfortable talking about it, to monetize or to, get people to know that your show exists?
Yeah, I love this question. So we worked on the podcast. We've been live for 3 years now. We worked for free for most of that time. So we joined Patreon April of 2019, I think. And we started in December 2017. So we were working for a long time with no ads, not a dime. And we were getting these insane numbers in our software. We had meetings for hours, calling different sponsors, different agencies, somebody take us, and nobody really bought it. Nobody really thought we had an audience, thought we had any real stickiness. And so we made the move to Patreon after seeing what it had done for other podcasts that were behind, with big agencies behind them, and they were putting up extra content. We were like, well, let's see what happens. Let's see what we can do. Especially that Bachelorette that year was Hannah B, and we were not anticipating recapping that season. We were like, oof, that's going to be rough. We can't do that for free. And so we made the move over to Patreon, really explaining to our listeners how hard we tried, how hard we work. And they know, I think people don't realize, your listeners know if they hear an ad or not. So you can explain to them and say, hey, you haven't heard any ads, but this is costing me money and time, and we want to put value on our time. And so we put up our Patreon, and then we've been on there ever since.
That's great. And you've had some success with it?
We have, yeah. Patreon is also a very supportive company as well. They've done a great job with that too.
That's great. And then in terms of kind of getting your show listened to, do you have specific, I mean, I know a lot of people will do cross promoting on other podcasts where they agree to, they go to a show and they're like, you talk about ours, we'll talk about yours. Yeah. There's some success there, but I don't know if you do that. And then what ways have you kind of gotten the word out about the show?
Yeah. Our tagline is that we are two Black girls who invade the whitest show on earth. And so with us invading and encroaching on a space where it feels like we weren't welcome, that brought attention. So if you go somewhere where you really feel like your voice is not heard, and you really think that nobody else is saying what you're saying, you're going to get attention eventually. We didn't have an Instagram until right before we went on Patreon. So we were a year and change with just Twitter, and we would just live tweet. And then that was the only way that we marketed ourselves. But it's because we were interrupting and invading a space that's how we got our attention. So if your voice is unique, you will get the attention, but you just have to kind of do your research on that end.
Love that. All right. So we've talked, a bit about indie podcasting. I want to go back to Jenny, because I know you're in a really different world of being a part of a big network. And I think, just to give people an idea sort of what these jobs look like and what these workplaces look like. How many people are on your team? I mean, how many people are at the company? And then, how many people do you specifically work with? And then what are, this is a question that I'm asked a lot too, is what are some of these specific roles in podcasting? Because I think sometimes people are like, oh, I guess I should be either a host or a producer, but there are actually a bunch of other kind of cool and interesting potential jobs. So maybe you can tell us about your workplace and some of the roles there.
Sure, of course. So I oversee a team right now of about 4 full-time people. We're continuing to hire. We've got probably not enough people for as many shows as we're trying to run. And I'm just talking about full-time people. We work with a team across each of our shows. We have freelance editors, in some cases producers, writers. So there's a whole infrastructure of people working on all of these shows. So it's hard, when I look at sort of that whole world, that's dozens of people across all these shows. But on my team, the full-time people are generally producers. But my shows are a little bit unusual, I think, in the world of podcasting in that they're very text heavy. So, we have our mini series, which are very like tape driven. And I think, like the kind of shows that Anabel's describing and Justine, where you're like, a lot of shows are chat podcasts or they're tape driven where you're interviewing people and you're, digging through tape. A lot of my shows are a little bit different in that they're what we call single voice narration, or sometimes there's 2 hosts who are telling a story. So we're working with scripts that are like extremely dense compared to a lot of other podcasts that are out there. So we rely really heavily on writers and editors. And I think that's a role that maybe doesn't exist in quite the same way in some other shops. But so we work with people like that. So a typical kind of workflow is that we'll hire a writer, they'll work with an editor, an edited script will come to a producer in-house. And then once that eventually gets locked, it goes to a sound designer. And then we also do interview episodes. So we work with interview producers who are helping oversee production and, tracking down guests and putting together these whole episodes. So, within our team, like the content team, those are sort of some of the roles that are available, but we also have a marketing team, a whole sales team who's amazing, who goes out and helps us monetize these shows. So there's a lot of different opportunities in the space. I think as people maybe sometimes forget about some of those other opportunities that exist as well.
Yeah, that's great. And just to get a little more show specific, I think I'll ask Anabel, what are the specific roles on Death, Sex, and Money?
Yeah, so we have 2 sort of full-time producers. We have an executive producer and we have a part-time sound designer and engineer who does our mixing, and then our host, Anna. So we're a 5-person team, and occasionally, like Jenny was saying, we'll bring in people for, bigger projects to help on a freelance basis, but the core is small.
And what's the main thing that a producer does? I mean, I know there are a million things, but on your show, what are some of the things that a producer does every day?
Yeah, so for us, producers really own episodes. So I would pitch a guest. I would say, I think that we should talk to this person. And I would own that interview kind of from beginning to end. And we are an interview show, so there's fewer moving pieces than on a more reported podcast. But that means that I would do the booking of that guest, the research and the prep for that guest to get the host in the right spot to interview them. And then I would do all the post-production. So editing the interview down from about 90 minutes to 25 minutes, and then working with our engineer to make sure that it sounds really pretty. And that's a team effort at every stage, but there's always one person who's kind of the engine behind an episode who's really got the vision for it and is taking it across the finish line.
I'm gonna go to Zakiya now. What advice do you have for students? I think a lot of the audience we're talking to today is students who want to work on podcasts.
Advice for students. Let's see. Well, I mean, if you go to a school where there are, writing classes, production classes, any kind of storytelling classes, if it's in podcasting or not, if you have access to that, take it. I didn't have access to that. My school didn't have any of that, but I still found a way to sell myself in my cover letters and in my interviews. I would say, yeah, I didn't go to Columbia Journalism School, which it feels like everyone has. I didn't go there, but I studied anthropology. And with that, I did a lot of field research where I interviewed people and I would write, and I'm interested in, human behavior, and I do research. So I feel like you can always find a way to pivot and there are a lot of transferable skills in podcasting. It doesn't mean you have to go to journalism school. You had to take all of those classes. In fact, in my experience, from just what I've seen, I actually feel like hiring managers prefer people who don't have like such a sparkly, predictable, traditional path. Not that it's bad if you do, but if you do, make sure that you find a way to stand out, because now we're at a time in our industry, which thank goodness it's shifting a little bit, because before it was only, you know, rich white people doing this, because you have to, there's like breaking into this field is pretty inaccessible. I was privileged enough to do an internship that was unpaid for 6 months. If I didn't land a job after that, I don't know what I would have done. But so I think if you don't have like the degree in journalism or this internship or that, as long as you show that you're eager, you're a fast learner, and you have an interesting perspective to bring to the table, I think hiring managers value that more than a shiny degree.
It's so true. I have like no idea who on my staff even like finished college, honestly. It's just not a thing I look at or think about. You just want to like know that they, you know, can tell a story and are fun to be around, basically.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the other thing. And it's just like, yeah, people want to see that you have good ideas, you're creative, you're hardworking, and you're pleasant to be around. So yeah, I think I might have said this before, but like, don't be afraid to just be yourself, because that's also when you're looking for a job. I know it doesn't feel this way, especially when you're young and starting out and you're so eager, but always remember that in an interview and you're looking for a job, you also want to see it. Would I be happy there as well? So you want to be yourself in the interview, because if they don't vibe with you, then you're not going to vibe with them and you're going to be pretty miserable.
Yeah, and the internship thing is real, and it's a bummer. Like so many of these jobs come out of internships. And I mean, for me, like I was at StoryCorps, and then I was like, I would do StoryCorps for 4 hours a day, and then I would run to this like law firm where I was doing financial collecting for a corporate law firm, because I was like, I can't just not have a job, you know? But
Right.
yeah,
all
so
the side hustles, man.
I know it's often like I felt like I was working like, you know, 14-hour days for years. And weirdly, now that I have my own company, I'm like working normal hours. But yeah, it feels it's intense. And I mean, interns need to be paid, but that's a separate issue. It's crazy to not pay your interns. And can you also tell us, because I know that like you have created a resource that's really helped connect a lot of great people with jobs. It's something that like my company uses all the time. So maybe you can tell people about the directory that you created and sort of how they can be a part of it, and you know how it started and why you wanted to do that.
For sure. For sure. Excuse me. So my friends and I co-founded a directory called POC and Audio. And the origin story is that we were fed up and annoyed. It's me and 2 other Black women and 2 other Asian women. And my good friend, Phoebe Wang, who is a true artiste. She was amazing. She was winning an award for like Best Emerging Artist. And we had met at another program. Oh, this is another tip. It is important to get your name out there. So I applied to like all the fellowships, all the grants, all the scholarships, and that, wow, I don't think I'd be where I was today if I didn't have that, because then people were like, ooh, who's this person who got that thing? So anyway, I met Phoebe at one of those things. It's called, the Third Coast Ragdale Radio Fellowship. If you Google those words, you should find it. But especially for those of y'all who are into artistic or things that, anyway, you'll Google it and you'll see it, but it's to help like underrepresented producers tell their stories. So I met Phoebe there and we became friends. And that's just going back to Jenna's point that when you make friends, you never know what's going to happen with that friendship. So we were at Third Coast, which is this festival, audio festival, where a lot of people in our industry come together and go to panels and mingle and network. she was accepting this award. And she was like, yo, Zakiya, I want to practice my acceptance speech. And I'm thinking about calling out the racism in our industry because at the time and still now, a lot of hiring managers, often white people, would say, whenever, you know, there were questions about having all white teams, they'd say, oh, well, it would be great to have a person of color on the team, but there just is no talent. They're not out there. We've tried and we can't find them. And so Phoebe and I decided to use her speech to shout out a bunch of names of POC producers, just pretty much being like, we've been here, y'all just aren't doing the work to get us in the room and help us in the room. And, you know, going back to what I was saying, barriers of access to these spaces. There's so much talent, but not everyone can afford to live in New York with no money for months. Like who? So that speech turned into us really organizing and coming together and bringing in our comrades and our colleagues to work on this. And it was unpaid labor. I had a full-time job, or I would think I was working 2 or 3 jobs, freelancer life, and working on this because we were just so exhausted from people just being erased, and hiring managers not being held accountable and just lying. And so we were like, oh, we're going to make you a directory so that you can no longer use that lie. And then we also didn't want it to just be to center whiteness still in a way, like, here we are, white people, please hire us. So it's also a community for all of us, POC producers, music composers, editors, writers, hosts, to come together and find community and find other people who are doing similar things. We're also still working on different ways to do outreach to the people in the podcast and in the directory, to extend beyond a directory and to find potentially different activities or talks that we can put on. But, you know, it's a whole pandemic and we're all tired. So that's slow moving, but it's coming. But now the directory, shoot, I wish I knew how many people are on it now, but I think like in the thousands. So I recommend, if you are a person of color, to join. And it's simple. You just fill out a profile, name what your interests are, and be as specific as you can about your interests and what you would like to do. And I've heard so many success stories of people being hired through this directory. And one feature of the directory is we intended for the people using it, people in positions to hire, we intended for them to have to do some work and not just plug and play, like, oh, we're looking for a Black queer woman, bloop, 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 there, you know, because that also, just because a person is in the room, that's not just like, yay, check diversity, especially if they're the only person of color in the room, there's a lot of tokenism. So we want to make sure that we want to make sure that these people of color are not only hired, but hired at places where they are supported and their talent will be invested in, and at places that are willing to train these newcomers, because honestly, it's in companies' best interest, because especially now, I feel like we're at a time when everyone's complaining, like, all podcasts sound the same. I'm tired of these old white men hosting everything. It's like, talent has been here. You just haven't paid attention. So we made the directory such that people who are hiring have to do a little extra work to read through everyone's profile and outreach and form a relationship to get to know them. So that was a lot of information, but TLDR, if you're a person of color, sign up for POC and Audio Directory, make your profile as specific as possible, let your passion shine. And feel free to use the directory to find other people of color who are doing similar things, and just reach out and say, hey, everyone's super friendly on there.
It's really an amazing resource, and it's helped a lot of people find great staff. So it's awesome. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
I want to say that, yeah, we're going to be moving on to audience questions pretty soon. So get those in if you haven't already. And I have a question for each of you. I want to know what people are listening to. So Justine, let's start with you. So what are 2 shows that you recommend that you have nothing to do with the making of?
Sure. So the one that I've most recently dove into is called Sibling Rivalry. It is a drag race podcast with Monet Exchange and Bob the Drag Queen. They are our Patreon. They're in drag, so I'm going to say sisters, our Patreon sisters. And I just recently became a patron of theirs, and their podcast is so hysterical. If you're a Drag Race fan, go check them out. And then Naked Beauty, the Naked Beauty podcast is a really, really great podcast put on by Brooke Devard. She is one of the nicest people I've met so far in the industry. And she has a great podcast about something that I did not think you could podcast about beauty. And she makes it incredibly interesting and fantastic. And she interviews really, really great, really cool people. So yeah, those are my two.
Cool. Love Brooke. Let's go to Anabel. What are two podcasts that you love that you don't make?
So I am really loving this new show from WBUR called Anything for Selena, which is about Selena, the pop star. And it's just a history of her life. And it's told through the host's sort of relationship with her music. And it's just really fun audio. Like, it's just so immersive. And it's also out in English and in Spanish, which is really neat. So you can hear two different versions of it at the same time. So I love that. And then I am also listening a lot lately to the Cut podcast. I just love that it's a total grab bag every week of like stories that I never would have thought of. Like in one story, the host Avery gets like a tarot reading, and another one they just rewatched 13 Going on 30 and talked about what it means to be turning 30 like in 2021. And it's just really fun, and she is an incredible writer. So I think that's a good one to listen to just sort of get a sense of like a huge range of things you can do on a single show. Like, I always feel surprised.
She has an amazing voice too.
Yeah.
The host, and she's so cool. All right, Zakiya, tell us some shows.
I love Have You Heard George's podcast? Listening to that reminded me of why I got into podcasting. It is unlike anything you've ever heard. It's so musical, mixes spoken word and music, and it talks about like inner city life in England, I think. And George, the host, is just so smart and dope. I've literally never heard anything like it. And it just opened my mind to the possibilities of storytelling in our field. And it was just so artistically inspiring. Another one also in that vein that like inspired me is made by my mentor, Sharon Mashihi, Appearances, which also is like memoir and fiction. And she's just a weirdo, which I love, and just super creative and is very artistic about what she does. And again, that really inspires me. And it's good those are two good listens for people who are interested in doing something off the beaten path. And you're just curious, like, how can I be creative in podcasting? There's so many ways. And those are two suggestions.
Love it. Last but not least, Jenny, what should we listen to?
So I started checking out You're Wrong About, because we had the co-host Michael Hobbs as a guest on Even the Rich, and he was so much fun to listen to. And so afterwards I was like, I've got to go like binge his podcast. So I listened to the Meg and Diana series, which was so the premise of the show is they take a topic that like everyone sort of thinks they know the narrative about, and then they dismantle it and sort of like look at how that was wrong, or with the benefit of hindsight. So they did a whole thing on Prince Charles and Diana, and I would listen to it after binging The Crown. So it was a lot of unhappy marriage in a short period of time. But it was super interesting, and he and his co-host Sarah Marshall are just great and like thoroughly entertaining. And then the other one that's totally different from that is I love LeVar Burton reads. I love fiction, but I don't typically read short stories because I feel like I'm often kind of left like wanting more. But he picks short stories that he loves. He like reads them to you. It's like the most relaxing thing on a Friday night, like draw a bath, light some candles, put on LeVar Burton. Anyway, they're thoroughly enjoyable, and it's a great way to like get exposed to stories that I feel like you like never find otherwise.
Oh, these are all such good recommendations. Everybody listen to these people. They know what they're talking about with these shows. Anyway, it's been really lovely to ask you all questions. I'm not the only one who has questions here. And so I am going to throw it to audience questions. And I believe that the first person asking a question is Michael. And maybe Michael, you can tell us what school you're from and then ask your question.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to all of us. My name is Michael Berg. I'm a senior at Canisius College. I study communications and English, and I'm minoring in entrepreneurship and women and gender studies. My question is, what advice do you have for independent podcasters so that they could develop themselves both professionally and develop their podcast as well?
It's a good question. Let's go to Justine for that answer.
Yes. Oh, thank you for coming to me. I feel such a draw to you, Michael, because I went to a school called Quinnipiac. And so I know how it is having a school with a long name, lots of vowels. So you want to know advice for independent podcasters. I think the number one thing is don't try and get into it for the money, because the money didn't come for us for a really long time. So as long as you're having fun doing it, then you'll most likely see success. Also, now is such a good time to be creative because people are consuming so much. People are sitting at home more. A lot of people said at the very beginning of the pandemic, I remember that people were not going to listen to podcasts because they weren't driving or commuting places. And people's lives just kind of adjusted, and we are just consuming now more than ever. And people, especially people who are alone during this pandemic, want to feel like there's a friend in the room. So just be as creative as your emotional well-being allows you to be at this time. And then as far as like marketing and getting it up off the ground, I would say that if you want to get your podcast to a place where you're like, going to an agency or whatever, or if you want to go to Patreon and you want to just build an audience enough who would pay for your content, start to think about your podcast as not just a podcast. Think about it as like a business and a media company. And what does that company have a mission statement? Does that company have goals? What do you want to do? What do you not want to do? Who do you want to hire? And if you start thinking about it like a business, you'll turn it into a business, and then you'll be able to kind of market yourself that way instead of just a voice in the void. So that's my advice for you.
Since there's like such a sea of podcasters nowadays, I was just wondering how you all went about finding a voice as a podcaster, or for those who are producing and selecting concepts, how you go about prioritizing some which seem more interesting, things like that.
Yeah, Jenny, I'm guessing that you get like a lot of or like look at pitches and to decide partially what to do. How do you decide, what makes you say like, oh, we have to do this show?
I mean, I will say like there's a whole committee of people at Wondery who is responsible for that decision making, and I'm not on the part that greenlights new shows, but I do field a ton of pitches for our existing shows, or we're in the position of trying to like decide on topics that we're going to cover on our slate of shows. And for us, because a lot of the topics we do are more sort of evergreen, we're looking for things that both have like that still have resonance right now, that feel like even if they're distant, they feel familiar, and there's a reason to do them like at this moment in time. So like one of the shows I work on that I really love is American History Tellers. And so even though it's a history show, we're always trying to pick topics that like kind of fit the mission of the show and are educational in some way, and hopefully is something people haven't heard to death, but that there's also like a reason that it feels like someone would want to like listen to this at this moment in time. But I'll say like for Wondery as a whole, we're looking at shows that sort of feel like they would benefit from, quote, like the Wondery treatment. You know, we're kind of known for making immersive podcasts and more sort of storytelling. So we have to look at a pitch and see like there's a reason for us to do this as opposed to like any other company out there. Like, what are we going to bring to the table that's different than how someone else would do this podcast? And do we feel like we can do the concept justice? And we talk about looking for things that are both familiar and different. We don't want to do something that seems like every other podcast out there, but it should feel like there's sort of some context for people to like understand and appreciate it.
Well, yeah, I think for us at Pineapple, we like to look for kind of new and totally different things, hopefully for new audiences. Like we were just talking the other day about like, I can't think of a podcast really about like class in America. We were like, let's create one. So that's like a thing that we're working on. But I think thinking about something that hasn't been done before, or thinking about audiences who don't have much content, you know, made for them, which is a lot of people in the podcast world, is I think is a good place to start. I think now we're going to Alyssa Morales.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for talking to us. I go to Fordham University at Lincoln Center. I'm a communications and culture student. I'm a senior. And Zakiya kind of answered this question a little bit earlier about like, you know, knowing your worth and, you know, finding these sort of internships that are paid. But I feel like, I don't know, I feel like just sometimes I just get really bad at imposter syndrome because I always, you know, I get these interviews and all that, and, you know, they never go through, and I always end up like blaming myself. So I guess what I'm asking is, what is your advice for people who are trying to find, you know, paid positions as a college student, and also like just general like post-grad advice, especially, you know, in this industry, because it's so new and all that.
Oh my gosh, imposter syndrome is real. And then when I remind myself that like, okay, Michelle Obama has had imposter syndrome, like, so then that reminds me that like, okay, there's not something wrong with me. It's more so the society that we live in that has convinced me that I'm not good enough. So when I like stop internalizing that feeling, that helps. Also having honestly supportive friends to gas you up by being like, yo, you know you're good. Like, just even outside of, you know, the job search, just make sure you have like, you know, a supportive network that reminds you how great you are. And I guess advice for, you know, just like the job hunt, I would cast a wide net, but at the same time, I wouldn't waste your time and energy applying to something that you're deep down are like, I would actually hate this job. But I'm glad that I cast a wide net. I'm glad that I applied to something that I thought I wasn't qualified for. I was an intern at StoryCorps, and one of my mentors there told me to apply to the AP position at Latino USA. And I was like, but I'm an intern, and it goes intern, PA, AP. I can't do that. But I got it, you know, you just never know. And I think I got it. And, you know, even the woman who hired me was like, I know she had less experience than other people, but she was just so eager, you know? And I think if you show your excitement, then people will be excited about you. And yeah, if you just go in with confidence and remember that like, I am here to show them that they need me, that I'm actually an asset. And honestly, especially for like these like super white shows, super straight shows, I will say like, y'all need me. Like, I'm a queer Black woman from the South. Y'all don't represent any of that. And you say that you want to reach out to those audiences. You can't do it without me, you know? Even if it feels like you're being cocky and arrogant, you're not. But I really do think that that confidence draws people to you, and it's like, and they make it, it's hard to forget that. So I think that just go in with confidence, listen to one of your favorite pump up songs right before an interview. Even sometimes I'll do this with my friends. I'll send them a voice memo, gassing them up like minutes before their interview. Ask your friends to do that. And then I think you'll carry that energy. Also, another thing I think hiring managers appreciate if you have made an effort to get to know the company and the shows and, find a way to work that into conversations. If you have some pitches in the back of your head, because that's something I wish I had known, that it's a common question for them to ask, like, oh, do you have pitches for us? And if you could come in prepared, they'll love that. Always just think about the questions that they'll ask in an interview and practice that interview and those interview questions. Like they always ask, what's an episode, to critique an episode of theirs. Make sure you're listening to all the episodes, and even in your notes app as you're listening, like jot down, okay, episode 3, blah, blah, blah. They could have done this better. And yeah, I could go on, but I'll stop there.
Great, thank you so much.
In on this.
Oh yeah.
I'd love to jump in on this too, because I think it's a really important question. And I think it's something that women in particular deal with. I think this is like sort of jumping to like the next phase after, like, I know it's hard to get that initial job, but I hire a lot of people, and I think it's interesting to me that like how often it's important to be persistent, because I can guarantee you like men are very persistent, and often like women are kind of afraid to be like, oh, like, and I was this way too when I was like trying to get jobs and when I was a freelancer. Like you kind of don't want to bother people, or if you don't hear back after an initial email, you think like, oh, like that's a no, so I'm gonna like leave it. Sometimes people are just busy, and if they really want you to leave them alone, they'll let you know. But it's okay to follow up, and it's important to ask for what you think you're worth. I think it's much less common for women to ask for more money, but I can guarantee you like a lot of men are very comfortable doing that, and the answer might still be no, but you definitely won't get it if you don't ask. I think it's important to realize that you probably bring more to the table than you think you do. When I was starting out as a freelancer, I never missed a deadline. I really like self-edited, so my stuff was really clean coming in. I wish I'd known how rare that was, because I would have started looking for more opportunities sooner. So I think keep in mind, you only know what you're doing, and so you might be judging yourself really harshly, but you may not realize like that you're head and shoulders above other people. So trying to like project that confidence going into interviews, and not being afraid to like remind people of how great you are.
And project that confidence in a cover letter.
Yes.
And I have one other thing to add, and all of those answers were so great. And Zakiya, I wish I had your pump up voice memos, like going into things.
I will send them to you.
That sounds like so much fun. But I also think like all of us got into this industry because we like making things. And I think that like when you're applying for jobs, it really helps to have made stuff. And that doesn't have to be a podcast. It doesn't even have to be audio. But if you have like an Instagram that's really creative that you're super proud of, or you've written a blog post, or you think your Twitter is really funny, like let that sort of shine through in your applications and in your interviews, because like if you're a creative and curious person, you can learn how to do that in any medium. So it doesn't have to be like, look, I know how to make an audio show for you, but you can say like, I am ravenously hungry to do this kind of creative work, and here's how I've already done it. And that always, like when I'm on the other side of these interview processes, like that really stands out.
Totally. Yeah. And reach out directly to some of the people who you want to talk to in the industry. Like it's very often they won't write back, but usually if somebody writes to me like 3 times and is like, I'd really love to, I'm new to this, or like 2 times, like I'm new to this and I'd love to like learn about it. I mean, I've met so many of my like future employees that way, honestly, just by being like, oh, this person, like I want to help this person out, and like they seem, special, and like you remember those people. So yeah. But there's so much mediocrity, and once you realize that, like once you're like in a room with a lot of people for many years who like some are really amazing and smart and some really think that they are, like my imposter syndrome is almost completely gone now, because I've been in enough rooms with people who have not impressed me, but who do impress themselves. This is getting mean, but my point is like you're more special than a lot of people who think they're really special, and it's a good thing to keep in mind. Reynold Ray Offer.
There we go. You got it right. Hello, everyone. I'm Ronald Reafor. I go to SUNY New Paltz, a biology major with a double minor in film and video studies and business administration. And I recently started developing a podcast. Like as a biologist, we study a lot of species. I was like, who studies human beings? So I explore human being behavior in a very funny and quirky way in each episode. And I haven't actually posted any of them, but I've given a lot of my friends to listen to them, and there's so much positive feedback. But I have that fear of, if I start, am I gonna be able to consistently keep up with it? So my question is what is your advice on how someone that's just starting, that plans to start a weekly podcast, what is your advice on how they should structure their production timeline to meet up with that goal? I know the baseline is hard work, but do you have any tips or anything?
I'll take this one. So as someone who is dictated by a schedule of a show that I have no control over, we don't even know when the show starts. I don't know when the Bachelorette's gonna start. I don't know, I don't know what's gonna happen. Sitting down and planning this creative thing around the life that you already have is really important. And also we started the podcast because we would drink a bottle of rosé and talk until 2 a.m. anyways. So if you're doing it anyways, you seem very passionate about biology and the study of humans already, just through Zoom. If you're doing it already, there's not really it's almost like you're scheduling in a conversation with a friend, but it's just a few more hours long, and then you put in some sound effects. So if you think about it like that, then that will help, but just continuously remind yourself that this is your creative outlet, and it'll get out when it gets out. And if you have an audience that appreciates you, they'll appreciate your time management. And if it's out a day late, then it's out a day late. But yeah, just scheduling it around the life that you already have is important.
I have one quick thing to add. I mean, maybe this is no duh, but make a schedule for yourself that you can stick to, so you don't have to overthink oh wait, I need 2 hours today to edit this, blah blah blah. Maybe every Tuesday morning from 9 to 12 I do XYZ. Also, another helpful thing is I don't know your release schedule or this or that, but set up a long runway for yourself, already have some material in the can. And also sometimes this happens to the best of us. Sometimes we're yo, we have a hole to fill, and this episode isn't coming together. What's our backup plan? So make sure for those days where if it doesn't come together, which is fine, we're all human, make sure you have a backup plan. So an easy fix is just slotting in a two-way, an interview that's really interesting. Maybe you had done one for another episode and you use some clips, and for this one you're hey, this is a special episode where we're gonna release the full episode. And the listeners won't know that you dropped the ball that week, but just start to think about, I guess, not to sound scary, worst case scenarios, but just have backup plans for yourself.
Okay, gotcha.
One more thing, do it in seasons. Do 12 episodes and then take a 3-week break. I didn't know that was a thing before I started, and now I'm locked into 52 weeks a year. Do seasons.
Got it.
All right, now we're going to Rachel Malak.
Hi, I'm Rachel Malik. I graduated from Fordham University back in May 2020, and I've been doing, my podcast has kind of been my quarantine passion project, so it's given me a lot of time to really focus on it, which has been really fun. My question to you guys, is it a mistake to keep my topic too broad? We kind of went in with the idea of post-grad life, which is now everything under the sun. I don't really have a set theme for the show. It's hard to describe what the show is other than me talking to my friends and sometimes special guests about whatever I feel like talking about that week. Is that a mistake going in? I want to try to pitch myself as a host. I'm not married to this show specifically, more so me one day getting hired to do any show. So is that a mistake to have that mentality going in? What are your thoughts there?
I can start on this one because I want to pick up with the answer that we just had, which was seasons are your friend. And I am a big fan of the themed season. If you're I'm going to spend 6 episodes talking to my friends about money, in the post-grad life. And then it gives you a little bit of focus, but you've also built yourself an escape hatch to be like, I'm bored of talking about money. Now I want to talk about this other thing. And it sounds like if what you're trying to do with your show is just get some practice as a host, learn how to interview, like get your friends on and hear what they're thinking about this past year. Broad doesn't seem bad, but I think that doesn't also mean that you can't focus in at strategic points.
And just in terms of like getting hired as a host, when we're hiring hosts, we're never actually really hiring hosts. We're like finding ideas, and the hosts are the people who are bringing those ideas. And so I would say that no matter what, you're gonna want to always have like a pretty good focused idea. And I think it's totally fine, like what Anabel's saying, for you to really just like think of this as like practice. But when you actually are like pitching yourself as like a host to networks, they're going to want to really know like what the idea is, what's different about it, what's different about you, how are you set apart, that sort of thing. So I just keep that in mind too.
Hey, I'm Janine. I am a junior at NYU. I study dramatic writing. So my question right now is, how much time do you devote to writing the script or outline? And then how is this different when you're interviewing others?
I can start that question, and maybe other people will have things to add. For our shows, which are heavy on the writing, we typically allow a month for research and outlining, sometimes longer if it's a new writer. And then once we have a locked outline, typically a week per rough draft. And those are, typically, between 3,500 and 6,000 words usually. And then we're editing the next script while the writer's going on to the next episode. So there's a lot of overlap where they're writing and also sort of responding to edits. So depending on the show, the whole sort of our seasons are typically 6 episodes, although that can also vary. But, typical production time on the scripting and outlining side might be, 2.5 to 3 months, depending. And obviously for an interview episode, it's like a week. It's much shorter.
Hi, I'm Holly Grace Shamili. I'm currently a junior at NYU studying recorded music with a minor in Business of Entertainment, Media, and Technology. My question is, how do you obtain insights on your podcast's audience, and then how do you use those insights in your next episode or your overall show in general?
I can start with that one. Since we are on Patreon, we have kind of like a entrance spreadsheet that we have where it takes fun things first, like what's your birthday, what's your sign, stuff like that. And then we go into like, how old are you and what's your race or ethnicity? And that's really how we see it, because otherwise, when we were just going to Apple and Spotify and things, we didn't really get those metrics at all. Also, another place to get them, if you have any socials, it's really easy to kind of preview and see who's listening and who are your loyal listeners. And also around your subject matter as well, because most of the people who listen to The Bachelor, for example, are white women, and we just happen to have a lot of white women who listen to our podcast. So yeah, I would say those 3 things. But take a survey, just ask them.
Yeah, we always set up a Google. Oh, sorry. We set up like a Google voicemail for basically almost all of our shows, and so that people can like feel like they have a line in to the hosts, and we get just like amazing voice messages and learn a lot about people that way. And sometimes we'll even turn them into a segment. We'll say like sorry, my 4-year-old is yelling, but I used to work on this show Another Round, and we would we had a voice memo thing set up where we would give people a prompt. We would say like, one that was really amazing was, we said like, call in and tell us about like a microaggression you experienced at work. And then we turned it into this like beautiful segment of like 10 voices sort of like overlaid with each other and music, and people loved it. And I think it's like it's a great way for your audience to feel like there's just more of a back and forth, and to feel like you're you're listening to them and they're not just listening to you.
I have something to add. So I was a producer on a show called Nancy, which is it was canceled. It was a queer podcast out of WNYC, and I feel like our fandom was like none other. Nancy listeners love Nancy, and you could see that love in our Facebook group, and we made a point to be very interactive with our listeners to the point where it made a whole other community of Nancy listeners. Like there's different gaggle groups in like Portland and this and that, different Nancy listeners coming together. And it's just so cool to, once you just show your audience a little bit of attention and show that you actually care about them and what they think, you could, like Jenna said, that also leads to a lot of incredible stories. And two, it just makes, I think, listeners feel like they know you even more, and then it makes their fandom even stronger. So yeah, I would not undercount the value of being accessible to your listeners and making a space for them and checking in with them, even asking them like, yo, what do y'all want an episode about? Or has anyone dealt with it? Like what Jenna said, yeah, make like a Facebook group. Okay, but it's 2021. Is anyone doing that anymore? I don't know.
Yeah, hi. First of all, I want to say thank you guys for coming and speaking. This has been super educational and interesting, and I'm kind of honored to be the last person to ask a question. But I am a junior at Pace University, and I major in communications. I've been pretty drawn to audio storytelling and podcasting as a whole recently. I've edited like 2 random episodes for classes or what so, and have a radio show with my school's radio station currently. But my question revolves around this idea that I have for a show that I'm currently sitting on. Like I'm sitting on it and dwelling on it, and I'm so excited to develop it more, but I can't really pursue it or like do anything with it until after COVID / after I graduate next May. So I wanted to ask you guys if you have any tips or tricks to prepare me to like be able to produce something that I'm really proud of, and like because I'm super passionate about what I want to do with this show, and I want it to be good when I can finally make it. So do you have any tips and tricks leading up to that? And I also wanted to piggyback and say, do you have any tips and tricks on networking in the city currently with COVID? Because I found that really difficult. And with me graduating in a year, I do want to have those relationships built before I leave. So thank you. Okay.
I could answer the last part of your question, like networking, and especially like in COVID. Well, I haven't networked in COVID, but just thinking about networking tips in general. So I was an eager beaver. When I was graduating, I looked at, I always get this, is it alumni, alumnus? I don't know. I made a spreadsheet of all the people who had gone to my college and who are doing things that I wanted to do. So like worked in journalism, some kind of storytelling. And so I had their name and I had their email, and I just sent emails, like very kind emails. Very small tip that I think goes a long way, at least for me as a receiver of these emails now. I appreciate whenever I do get like a random, not random, but an email from someone I don't know who's eager to get more information. I made sure in my emails to say like, I understand you must be busy, like acknowledge their time, because it is time and energy and labor that they are giving you. But everyone in radio, not everyone, but so many people in radio are nice. So they'll most likely say yes, but I think just acknowledge their time. Like, I know you must be busy, but I saw that you do X, Y, and Z, and I really respect that. And I would like to do similar things. I'm wondering if you're available for, a 20-minute Zoom call or something. But yeah, it's like, look up like your alum, whatever. They're probably going to be really likely to help. Also, another thing I did is I had a separate spreadsheet of people in the industry doing really cool things, whether or not they did go to my school. And I would read their bios, and then I would see where were they and who did they work with. And then that was like another way to find people to email and be like, hi, can you help me out? And honestly, like Jenna said, like I think just straight up email people. I feel like especially women and women of color in audio are very generous with their time and are most likely going to say yes. Yeah, that's the last part of your question. I know you had the first part. Maybe someone else can answer that.
Yeah, I can answer part of the first part, which is like basically, you know, you want to make a show and you want it to be great. It takes real time, and I would say, like, you know, don't expect that it's going to be amazing right away. Like, you should spend real time on it. You should, I mean, with our shows, like, we often are doing like 47 drafts of an episode, like, actually, and that's okay. And you know, especially like as someone starting out, like, you want to do a lot of experimenting too. I think, like, you don't want to decide this is exactly what my show has to be, and like, here's, you know, here's how I'm going to go about that. I think it's like, you're going to want to try it as, like, you know, an interview show, or try it as, like, you know, with like cool scored segments, and just like really spend some time just, you know, making weird stuff that won't necessarily go into the show. I mean, that's how you learn. Like, I used to just like talk to my dad and like record it, and then I would like set, you know, put music under it, and that's like how I learned to like cut interviews and to mix and score with music. So yeah, it's going to take a lot of time and a lot of effort. And if you believe in it, you know, commit the time.
I will say too, I'm going to jump in real fast. As far as producing new content, I would say don't be afraid, especially to like test something out now with anything that you can do. And that imposter syndrome that the other young lady was talking about can be a real beast. And I know for our show, I remember my goal for our show was for 40 people who we didn't know to listen. I was like, if that happens, we are a success. We were in the LA Times last week. So just keep going. Don't be afraid to make mistakes, especially this is creative industry. People are always making mistakes and slipping up and doing all kinds of crazy stuff. And then as far as networking goes, I actually would love when people email you with a skill that they have. So like Zakiya with her spreadsheets, that is a skill that you can offer someone. So if you have something that you can offer and be like, I'm really good at organizing this, I'm really good at Excel, I'm really good at Word or Adobe, offer that, because 20 minutes is not and should not be free. And so for you to just ask someone to like take time out of their day could be packed to the brim. But if you're offering something that you could do anyway, or that could be helpful to them as a creative in some sort of an organizational or editing manner or something like that, that is like an easy shortcut into networking.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. Thank you to the panelists. You're all wonderful. And hope you come back for more with the Center for Communication. And I guess, I don't know, follow us on Twitter. I barely tweet, but I guess some people like to do that. You know, I don't want to speak for everyone, but feel free to hit me up with like questions, or, you know, talking about the industry, that sort of thing. And yeah, it was great. Thank you for being here.